This programme contains graphic recreations of scenes of historic brutality, including torture and hangings, which may distress some viewers. Queen Anne's ships had been battered by a violent storm. One ship sank, Anne's almost capsized. The badly damaged convoy had limped back to Scandinavia. King James decided he would have to go and fetch his new wife himself. James arrived here at Kronborg Castle near Copenhagen in January 1590. His crossing had been equally violent. The world James walked into was very different to his native Scotland. Witch hysteria was infecting mainland Europe. Hundreds had already been executed as witches. Tens of thousands would follow. This idea that witches were the devil's handmaidens, hell-bent on death and chaos, hadn't yet reached James's kingdom. But in Denmark, he came face to face with the reality of Satan's witches. In April 1590, while James was still at Kronborg Castle, 2 witches were arrested in Copenhagen. And what was truly shocking was that they confessed to conjuring up the violent storms that had hit James and Anne's ships. At least 5 more witches were later convicted of the same crime. All were burned at the stake. In Europe, King James VI had seen that witches working for the devil had been hell-bent on killing him. He was about to receive proof that this dangerous belief was infecting Scotland too.
Tell me the truth.
The man responsible was bailiff David Seaton. He was systematically brutalising and torturing his housemaid, Gillis Duncan, to make her confess to being a witch. But Gillis would not yield. Seaton began to search her body because people believed the devil always left a mark on the bodies of his disciples. It could be anything: a mole, a birthmark. Seaton found what he was looking for on Gillis's neck. And for some reason, this is what broke her.
All I've done is by witchcraft. And with the enticements of the devil himself, I rode to the town where a witch was received in service of the devil. I danced in the rank with the others.
We'll never know why Gillis confessed now, after she'd resisted thumbscrews and wrenching. Perhaps the mark was from a sexual liaison, and in this highly religious time, she felt too much shame and guilt.
Gillis's confession had a seismic impact. It was the first recorded incident of a Scottish witch admitting to working for the devil. It set in train a sequence of events that would kill hundreds of people. The repercussions would last 100 years. Gillis admitted to being part of a coven. She gave up the names of 8 other witches. They, in turn, named more. In total, over 100 people were hunted down and tortured.
This raised the stakes enormously. It was no longer an isolated case of witchcraft. It was now a conspiracy of witches.
Under torture, Gillis said that her coven had been in league with witches from Copenhagen, the ones who'd been executed for attempting to murder King James and his queen. This was dynamite. It changed everything. It got the king's full attention. The person who had the most profound effect on King James was one of those named by Gillis Duncan, a woman called Agnes Sampson. Agnes was a midwife from Edinburgh. She was accused of being the most senior witch in the coven. And under torture, she too confessed to the attempted murder of King James. Agnes repeated the confession that had been beaten out of her in jail, that her coven had met with the devil. James saw himself as a highly intellectual king. He read widely and was fascinated by both natural philosophy and the new ideas of rational investigation. Agnes's confession did not convince him.
She's naught but a liar.
No lying, sire.
According to James, Agnes repeated pillow talk between the king and his new bride on their wedding night, when they were alone. This was enough to convince him that Agnes must be a witch. It certainly sounded like magic. But whatever James may have believed, in reality, there was little privacy for a 16th century king, even in bed. Possibly a juicy piece of gossip escaped the palace, or maybe the experienced midwife simply made an educated guess. In James's mind, there was now clear evidence that an international satanic conspiracy was out to kill him. And there was only one way to stop them: kill them first.
On the 28th of January 1591, Agnes Sampson was brought here to Castle Hill in Edinburgh to be executed. We don't know how many other convicted witches were with her that day, but we do know that she wasn't alone. These were innocent, confused and terrified people, people who had been imprisoned and tortured, people who had been prepared to say anything to stop the pain. All the victims were probably garroted before the fires were lit. It was considered a mercy, and compared to burning to death, it probably was.
As the convicted witches burned, the air would have been thick with the stench of burning human fat. It would have seeped into the crowd's hair, their clothes, even the porous walls of the surrounding buildings.
Of 200 people who'd been accused, around 70 had been found guilty of witchcraft and sentenced to death.
Gillis Duncan, the young housemaid who started it all, rotted in prison for a further year, before she too was burnt at the stake.